There are two main concepts when it comes to application security, and they are authentication and authorization. I want to start by talking about authentication. Authentication is when we find out who you are. We're not really worried about your permissions exactly, we're just worried about figuring out who you are. As you know, web applications are stateless, and so from post to post they don't remember you. And so we use all kinds of mechanisms in web applications to answer the question of who you are and to remember you. The most common way that we deal with this question is with a username and password. If you're familiar with ASP.NET, you are already familiar with forms authentication. Forms authentication is the way websites all over do authentication. It's just ASP.NET has a specific implementation of it. And forms authentication just basically means that we're going to ask you for credentials. Maybe it's just a username and password. It might be more than that. We're going to validate those credentials against a database or something, and then we're going to write a cookie on your computer so that the website knows you are who you say you are. Some websites, especially if they are intranet in a company that uses things like Active Directory, uses Windows authentication. This is another big option with ASP.NET developers, so you may know about Windows authentication already. And this doesn't work real well over the internet because you'd have to make everybody on the internet a user on your network. But for intranet applications, Windows authentication is a fine option, and basically what it does is it uses your Windows account to decide if you're an authenticated user or not. Now, both of these were used heavily in ASP.NET applications. They are still perfectly valid in MVC applications. What we do then is we can enforce certain methods and certain controllers with the authorize attribute. What we do is we put this attribute on top of certain pieces, and that is a way to let MVC know that if you're not authenticated, then you need to be authenticated before you can execute that method. So how do we handle membership? How do we handle usernames and passwords and those kinds of things? Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that you are quite free to use whatever authentication mechanism you like. But I do want to point out that there is a membership provider called Simple Membership, which has a very flexible database schema. You can make it look pretty much however you want. It also allows third-party authentication, so you can use Simple Membership to shunt off to some other website, or even incorporate things like authenticating through Facebook or LinkedIn or things like that with the right providers. Here's the interesting thing, though. The MVC4 Internet template uses Simple Membership for its framework by default. So when you start a new MVC project, if you've ever started with the Internet project template, you know how it has that accounts controller. Well, that accounts controller is using Simple Membership by default to manage its membership. So if you have your own scheme that your organization uses, that's fine. By all means, continue to use it. But if you're making a brand new application and you just need some authentication controls, you might take a look at Simple Membership because it can serve pretty much all your needs with very little configuration. To do authentication in MVC is relatively easy, and if you decide to use Simple Membership, it's even easier. What I've got over here is a project that I called Authentication Lab, but 90% of it really comes from the new MVC project. I come over here and go to New MVC4 Application, and I choose Internet Application. What that's going to do is it's going to give me a basic accounts controller with login, logout, registering new users, the whole shebang, all configured with Simple Membership. And so I can take that code and I can customize it to my needs, but it's nice to have it. It's nice to have it automatically generated. I'm going to cancel out of all this. and go back to my project, which once again is by far and away just the regular MVC4 Internet Application template. And what I've got here, let me fire this up real quick just to show you before we get into some of the code. And this is just the basic homepage from the MVC.net Internet application, but I've added a link down here for members only. So we're going to pretend that this website has members only material. When I click on this, it actually takes me to the index page. We'll find out how that works here in a little bit. But when I click go to our secure page, it won't let me. It makes me log in because I don't have access to that page. So let's take a look at how that works in code. If I look at the members controller, this serves up the two views we were looking at. You'll notice that setting up the authorization was really easy. I put the authorize attribute at the class level, and by default that will require authentication for everything. But I put this allow anonymous attribute on the index page, and that allows people just to view it. So maybe in my members only section I wanted to talk about the benefits of membership or whatever. This is an authorize attribute that specifies a specific role. I don't want to get too much into role-based management. That's more on the authorization side of security, but it does kind of show you what you can do with that authorize attribute. So watch what happens if I remove this. Allow anonymous attribute. I go to members only, and once again it's requiring me to log in because I don't have that allow anonymous there. That authorize attribute here at the top of the class requires that any of these actions then require me to have logged in. Now if I just want to do that to certain actions, I can do that. Okay, as you can see, I can put authorize at the action level as well. But when I put it at the top of the controller, it requires authentication for all of them. Now let's take a look at the account controller. This is how we add usernames and passwords and administrate them. And you'll notice that in this controller, it also has the authorize attribute, but you'll notice several of the actions have allow anonymous on them, like logging in. Well, obviously if you haven't logged in yet, you need to be able to log in, so that's allow anonymous. Okay, this is allow anonymous. Okay. But just about everything else, except for a few of these, here's registering a new account. Obviously if you've not registered, you can't be logged in, so those are allow anonymous. So as you can see, it's come up with a pretty specific security model for these things. Now, one thing I want to point out about the account controller is by default it uses simple membership, and so you can see here it already defines some roles here. Okay, some actions for login, for registering, and right out of the box this code will work okay. You do need to get in there and add your own roles. It's not going to know right away how to do that, but you have to add your own roles and that sort of thing. But once you've got it in there, then you can actually use the membership provider right out of the box with almost no customization except to add your own unique roles. So for example, I can come in here and I can register, test user, test pass, test pass. I can hit register. Okay, now notice here I'm logged in as test user. Now when I go to members only, now we're fine. Okay, and I can log off. Alright, so that's using membership, simple membership right out of the box. Once you've got your authentication mechanism, whether it's Forms authentication or Windows authentication, or you use simple membership, whatever you decide to do, You can even do it the ways you used to do it with ASP.NET. That's totally fine. But whatever you decide to do to protect your controller actions and views from unauthenticated users, all you have to do is use the authorize attribute.